Good evening and welcome. Let's see who's on the line tonight. Mr. Beckman, welcome. Glad you're here to join us. Let me go ahead, and if I see there's some people already on the chat right now, go ahead and tell us where you just give us your name and say hi. We'd love to welcome you to AP World History this evening. We're going to be doing Changing Social Hierarchies in the Early Modern World. So feel free to go ahead and chime in on the chat side and let us know you're here. Plus, we also have a poll, and I can see someone's already gone ahead and answered that, which is great. Feel free to jump in and go ahead and answer that. We're going to get ready to get going in just a minute. Let's do a little camera adjustment. Perfect. All right, well, we're looking at about 8 o'clock, so let's go ahead and engage the slides. But first, before you do, hi, my name is Donald Diorto, and I am an AP World History teacher in the Orlando, Florida area. I think if you saw my picture, I think I cleaned up okay here. I had a bunch of pie all over my face here from a charity event we were doing. So I think it is gone now, but I don't know. So we shall see. But for all the people that are on, welcome. We're going to be dealing tonight with changing social hierarchies in the early modern world. This is topic 4.7. So for some of you, you may be somewhat ahead of this. You might be right on this area, or you might be somewhat in 2, or you might be coming in the 3. That is a-okay, because really right now there are a whole different bunch of styles of how to do this. So let's go ahead and get the screen up and share that screen with you. Here we go. Give me just a moment. There we are. And let me go ahead and see. Let's get ready, and here we go. And Mr. Beckman, do we have a full screen up? Are you able to see the presentation at the moment? So, or anyone else on there, go ahead and give me a chime. I can only see me. All right, let's change that. So let's go ahead and share that screen with you. Here we go. Let's go ahead and see if that helps out there. There we go. All right. Hi, Anna. Welcome. So are you seeing the screen now? Go ahead and give me a yes or a thumbs up. Fantastic. Thank you, Anna. Let's go ahead and jump in and get you going. So welcome. Again, this is Fiveable, Changing Social Hierarchies, and we're going from 1450 to 1750. So now we're in the units, we're in unit 3 and 4. So also in this area, you're probably going to find some of the acronyms that we might be using. For instance, in my class, we're using GERMS, the acronym, how appropriate, for changing social hierarchies, the units 3 and 4. So let's go ahead and jump in and get you going. And as people come on. All right, and remember, you're on Fiveable, which means you can access all our great updates about things that are coming up through Twitter. You can do it through Instagram or YouTube. So go ahead and be sure to put in there at Think Fiveable and get linked in. Plus, at the end of this presentation, we're going to be providing the Google Slides we're going to be using so you can benefit from those. And if you haven't already, we also have a question section. So towards the end, if you have any questions or things you want to know more about, you can pop them right in. There's a button on the lower right-hand side. And hello, welcome. Glad to see some people from Michigan. And what we're going to do is also the polls in there, and I'll be looking at that too. So let's keep on moving. we got some great things coming up. So this is not the only presentation tonight. We have Wednesday tonight at 11 p.m. for our early birds or our West Coast, Hawaii, and going to Asia. Resisting Empires on Land and Sea. Evan Lindell does a fantastic job. He's an amazing teacher at this. So Sunday, this coming Sunday at 6 p.m., we're going to have a textbook reading. In other words, we're going to teach you how to strategically take incredibly large books. Let me find one. Like this. I know it looks scary, but do not be afraid. Sophia Mink and Skylar Basco, we are going to show you, they're going to show you how to strategically read those and to do it quicker than before. So, hey, I see some of my students on there. Hey, welcome. So, and also on Sunday at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we're going to have a Changing Religions in the Early Modern World. So this is going to be Jed Quianoy. Does a fantastic job with this. Plus, there's a lot of study session material. He's there to help you out with that as well. So also know that AP World isn't the only subject. If you're taking other AP classes, remember we've got 15 subjects total going on at Fiveable. So be sure to check those out. Just go to fiveable.me and check out what's going on. Let's keep the ball moving. All right, here's what we're looking at for this evening. We're looking at Introduction to Changing Social Hierarchies, 1450 to 1750 CE. So in doing so, we're going to look at the Ottoman society, or the Ottoman Empire. Amazing, I called them the society. Sounds like a rock band. Now, we're also going to do Russian social classes, Qing Manchu Dynasty. We're going to look at European elites and elites in the Americas. This is where North and South America enter in the Casta system. So let's go ahead and take a look at changing social hierarchies from 1450 to 1750. Our essential question is, how are social categories, roles, and practices maintained or changed from 1450 to 1750. Now, I don't expect you necessarily to know right away what the answer to this is yet. However, thank you. This is just that essential question when you're dealing with 4-7 in this topic. And our thematic focus this evening is social interactions and organizations. So it's SIO. Let's keep rolling. All right, so our first three empires, we're going to look at the Ottoman Empire, the Russian Empire, and the Manchu Dynasty. By the way, before we dive into there, I just want to let you know that we have this evening, some of you are coming on, you're able to always watch the live streams for free. The basic live streams are free to attend while they're live. Now, if you want to get access to the premium live streams, plus you want to be able to replay things, maybe you suppose you have something going on and you need, you have practice, you have another test going on, you have a social life, and you'd like to actually do things, you can actually subscribe to Fiveable Plus. Or some of you are coming in, you may have teachers like myself who are about to bring you in or have brought you into Fiveable Classroom. And in that case, you're getting access to all kinds of great stuff. So let's continue onward. We got the Ottoman Empire, the Russian Empire, and the Qing Manchu Dynasty. So let's keep it rolling. And I see somebody's got CCOT. Yay. All right. Ottoman Empire. So let's look at how changing social hierarchies occurred. The Ottoman Empire, you got to understand, experienced major tensions between two major ruling classes. You had the military elite, which were the Janissaries. Now, the Janissaries were mostly taken from non-Muslim boys, a lot of Christian, probably some Jewish, and what would happen is that they would bring them in through the Devshirm and go ahead and put that to and train them, and the best of the best that would go in the military, they would become Janissaries. These were like the elite fighting troops of the Ottoman Empire. So we'd have the Janissaries, which start moving up as their elite forces. But we also have the absolute rulers, the Sultan. So the sultans over time. So sultans could grant a tamar. This is a giving land or tax revenue to favored soldiers. The goal of the tamar, keep the janissaries loyal. If they're willing to give you land, revenues, this is all kinds of good things that you can deal with on here. So again, the goal of tamar, keep soldiers loyal. And we're going to see this conflict occur between the janissaries and a sultan. Now, janissaries, though they're the elite of the Ottoman military fighting forces, they're still slaves of the state. Remember, these are Christian or other kids that were brought in and brought up through the military. However, as time goes on and they build rank, they gain power, prestige. It would get to the point where janissaries would actually mount coups or attempt to take over the government against the sultan. So if you were sultan at that time, you had to keep a sharp eye on janissaries. You had to make sure you were granting tamar to the right people so that they did not run out of reasons to stay loyal to you. So let's keep the band moving along. Now here's some pictures of Ottoman janissaries in the 1600s. And you can see the characteristic long rifles. In the background, you can see the cannon. This is classic Gunpowder Empire material. So let's now look at women in the Ottoman Empire rising above traditional class roles. Now, one of the great areas that we see this happening in is that women in the Ottoman Empire had social and political roles, and some of these would start to evolve. Now, the Sultan's wives and concubines would all be part of a harem, and they would promote their own children, and they would play games of politics and one-upmanship and all kinds of things because they look at their children that they've had with the Sultan as possible heirs to the throne. And it isn't just the wives, the concubines too. They're playing political games, moving back and forth. So they're looking for a chance to have their child become the next Sultan, maybe the next Suleiman the Magnificent. So be sure to go ahead and join in on our poll. We've got, I can see we have several people have already commented in. Let's see how we're doing so far on it. Yes, I can see number of people, SAQs, we got a DBQ, we got some others. Keep on chiming in. We'll get back to that a little later. But anyway, let's go back to Ottoman Empire women. We're going to see some that are going to start to move up. A great example is Roxolana. This is an Eastern European girl in Eastern Europe. She was abducted by Crimean raiders. And usually when this happened, you get sold off as a concubine. And they were sold off to the Ottomans. Now, she's brought into Suleiman the Magnificent's background. Now, the Crimean raiders, these were individuals that would attack towns around the Crimean Sea. And they would go in there and they would seek people that they could enslave. And young girls, boys, all kinds of people, teenagers, they would bring them in and enslave them and sell them off. So these are Crimean raiders. Now, these Crimean raiders sell Roxolana after she's been abducted as a concubine. She comes into Suleiman the Magnificent's harem, but something amazing happens. Roxolana, when she deals with Suleiman the Magnificent, the Sultan, realizes, wait a minute, Roxolana is absolutely brilliant at military and government skills. So, and thank you, Mr. Beckman, for Crimean Peninsula. By the way, this is the area that right now has been taken from the Ukraine by Russia. Now they've built a bridge that clicks from the mainland over to the Crimean Peninsula. And this is an area that is still highly contentious to this day, but that's another unit to get to. Roxolana shows all this amazing military and government skills, and she ends up marrying Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. Wow, you go from being abducted by Crimean raiders, sold as a slave to Suleiman the Magnificent in his harem. and he ends up marrying you. And not only this, she ends up leading major Ottoman public works projects. So she becomes a major leader within Suleiman's empire and his wife at the same time. So this is an amazing accomplishment by any stretch of the means. So viewer question time. Here we go. So be sure to put your answer in the chat box. Now, how is Roxolana an example of a woman rising above traditional Ottoman gender roles? Oh, fantastic. Thank you for the podcast episode. So how is Roxolana an example of a woman who is rising above what were traditional Ottoman gender roles for women? So let me wait for the box. We'll give you a minute to go ahead and put some things in. Don't be afraid to chime in. Just as a hint, Roxolana's background was rather untraditional, how she moved up to power. So go ahead and put an answer in the chat box, and let's see what's coming up. Ah, we got some more people coming in. DBQ, yep, we've got somebody, a lot of SAQs, and other, not so many multiple choice questions yet, but that's okay. All right, last call for, there she is. Roxolana had positions of power in society which was uncommon in traditional Ottoman gender roles. Absolutely. She was an Eastern European woman who was enslaved, and all of a sudden she marries the Sultan and becomes a major public works project leader. It was amazing. She had more power. She absolutely did. So when you get in the answers, you want to be sure to build into the detail. Tell us specifically why, because when you take the AP exam, they love that. So absolutely, she has more power, but she does this because she works in very well at getting the Sultan's attention, and she reveals that she has some very top-notch skills. So you can see a painting of her back then, or what we would call today, you know, a painted selfie. So she goes way beyond just being someone who is married. All right, let's continue with the Ottoman Empire, religious minorities. Here's some other changing areas. Now, religious minorities are going to prosper under Ottoman rule. Now, as long as you paid the jizya, or the non-believer tax, if you were from a different religion because you were in a Muslim Ottoman Empire, and this is under the Seljuk Turks, you can go ahead and prosper and continue to worship and continue to do things. Now, you did have to live in certain parts of town. There were certain areas that were just for you if you were Christian, Jewish, or other religious backgrounds. So as long as you pay that tax, you follow the laws, you're going to do well. Now, one notable thing is that, remember when in some prior backgrounds, when I talked about in Dar al-Islam, when I added in about Al-Andalus, or Spain under Muslim rule. Well, we understand that by 1492, the empire of the Kingdom of Castile and Aragon has gone ahead, and Leon have gone ahead and pushed out the Moors, or the Muslims, so Al-Andalus becomes Spain again. They proceed immediately to kick out all Jewish people and all Muslims. So for Jewish people, this puts them in a really difficult situation. Oh, great, where do we live now? Well, the Ottoman Empire would end up welcoming droves of Jewish people from Spain, who are also known as Sephardic Jews. So if you're Sephardic, it means you're coming from Spain. So many of them would move to the Ottoman Empire because they were allowed to prosper. They were allowed to practice their faith. So this is a way that you see other people coming in and changing social roles in the Ottoman Empire. All right, it is time for more viewer input, so do not be afraid to chime in. So, diasporic communities existed throughout the Muslim empires. whether it was in the Delhi Sultanate, whether it was in the Ottoman Empire, the Mamluk Sultanate, whether it was, no matter where you went, the Mongols, even though not a Muslim empire, before, those were areas. A diaspora simply means a dispersion of any people from their homeland. By the way, Carolyn Castellanos did a fantastic live stream about diasporic communities from all over the world. And how do you know if you might, who knows, some of you on our live stream right now, you might be from a diasporic community. So check that live stream out. You have Fiveable Plus or you're in Fiveable Classroom, look for Carolyn Castellanos, Diaspora Communities. It was an exceptional. So now let's get to the question. What are Sephardic Jews who immigrated to the Ottoman Empire from Spain an example of a diaspora community? So why are Sephardic Jews who immigrated to the Ottoman Empire from Spain an example of a diasporic community? Type your responses in the chat box. By the way, if you look at the top of that same screen, I put in parentheses what a diaspora is. Diasporic just means they are of a diaspora. Okay? So it's all right there. So glad you asked. Go ahead and chime in. So why are Sephardic Jews, they immigrated to the Ottoman Empire from Spain, why are they an example of a diaspora or a diasporic community? Basically, same thing. So don't be shy. Put it in the chat box. And while we're doing it, I'm going to see some more people have chimed in on our poll. Yes, we're seeing a lot of SAQ participants. Other, I'm guessing LEQ, maybe DBQ. Oh, we got some shifts. There we go. Feel free to jump into the poll button. It's right down at the bottom. All right, we've got an answer here. So Sephardic Jews is an example of a diaspora community because they moved away from their homeland in Spain. Yeah, they were actually kicked out. So they had lived there for 800 to 900 years, and then they're getting pushed out yet again. They're an example of a diaspora community because they're people that are not in their homeland. Because if you're Jewish, originally, if you were your homeland, you would be in Israel. What is modern-day Jerusalem and areas surrounding that area in modern-day Israel? So fantastic. Let's go ahead and continue onward. All right, now we're going to shift over to the Russian Empire. We got to talk about the Boyars. The Boyars are simply elite landowning nobles. So we had different communities. We had Muscovy Boyars who owned land. We had Boyars that were Novgorod. We had other Boyars. And yes, Jed Quinot's going to talk about this on Sunday too. The link's right there. So thank you so much, Mr. Beckman. Now, you're looking at Russia, and you got to understand that leaders like Ivan III, Ivan IV, who are Russian, in other words, they're Muscovy or Moscow oriented. Then you had those Boyars who were Novgorod and other area oriented. Novgorod would be to the little to the north and around Moscow. So let's talk about these Boyars. Boyars were these elite landowning nobles, and they would clash with rulers because they owned the land, they controlled people under it, and then you have Russian leaders such as Ivan IV who are stepping in, and they said, look, I want to build a greater Russia. I'm taking your land. So the Boyars and Ivan III, Ivan IV would clash, and this would continue on. Peter the Great and others as we move farther. Ivan IV's forces would conquer Novgorod, and he'd confiscate boyar lands. Plus, just to keep an eye on them, you might find a similarity to this in China. Ivan forced the Novgorod boyars to live in Moscow under surveillance. So he moved them to Moscow so he could keep an eye on them, make sure they weren't up to anything. So if you look back in your past, you might see in China that people were also moved into capitals. And in other empires, this was done also as a way to keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. So let's take a look at a map. Here's a map of Muscovy and Novgorod, Russia, where the Boyars. So if you're looking at this map, you can see Muscovy, and then you'll see Moscow as the city as you're pushing to Poland, Lithuania. You'll see Novgorod as it's farther to the north, and the city of Novgorod. You'll see Pskov. You will see in there Ryazan, and then you see Poland, Lithuania. And then as you look towards the east, you'll see the Khanate of the Golden Horde. And if you remember from the Mongols, this is where they go to Russia and they conquer, and they're used to having, having spoils. So they ask Russia, what do you have? Do you have silk? Do you have gold? Do you have all kinds of things? And Russians go, no, we don't. And the Mongols go, all right, you all pay tribute, or otherwise we're going to come back and take your people. But otherwise, we really don't want to hang out here because it's cold and we don't see a whole lot of resources. All right, so we're going to leave. But this is still our land. So you'll see the Khanate horde, you'll see the Timurid Empire down there, and Ottoman Empire as you move further down. But our big focus is from Moscow. Ivan IV is going to push into Novgorod, and he's going to push north. He'll push to the west, and he's going to push east to where those Khanates are and start taking those over. And this is going to continue with Russians as they move on. So this conflict with Boyars is far from over. All right, Russian Empire continued. Russian social classes, except for the top leader like Ivan III or the Fourth or Peter the Great later on, Boyars topped the social pyramid. They controlled land. They controlled the people who worked under it. Then there were the merchants. These were people that bought and sold things. And then last, the peasants. They were often attached to the land as serfs. So if a boyar sold a land, or if one of their sons or daughters inherited that land, you inherited the serfs as well. And if Ivan IV came through and took your land and brought it in, well, he took your serfs too. So if a noble sold their property, remember, serfs were sold with the property. They were connected to it. They were treated like property, like cattle or horses. So Russian serfdom equals slavery to the land. So let's keep rolling on. Now we're going to shift over to the Qing Manchu dynasty. Now remember, the Manchus are coming from northeast, what today would be Manchuria, which is part of the People's Republic of China, but it's the northeast section. It's where North Korea meets up and where Russia does as well. And the Qing dynasty is going to be ruled by the Manchus, which are going to come down into, they're going to feign helping a Chinese rebel, and they're going to march into Beijing, and eventually over time they're going to push through and control China. And this would be the last dynasty from 1644 to 1912. So if any of you have ever watched The Last Emperor, this is an excellent movie. You're looking, The Last Emperor, you're looking at a Qing or Manchu dynasty. So this is the last one. Yes, it was an amazing film. So Manchus are going to impose a new cultural order on the Han Chinese. Now, the Han Chinese men were forced to wear their hair in queues. This was a Manchu test of loyalty. It was like a kind of ponytailed, long, going down in the background. Now, if you refused to do this, you could be executed for doing this. In fact, Manchus would hire Han Chinese defectors to come over, and if they found cities or towns that were rebelling, they would have these Han Chinese defectors would move up as commanders. They would send them in with armed forces, and they would tell them to go in and massacre people, massacre as many as you can, set an example. So literally they would go in and leave literally next to no one alive. And when you walked into these cities and you were like, why is everybody dead? They didn't wear their hair in a queue. Point taken. So, you can either wear your hair as a Han Chinese like the Manchu do, or you can end up like all these dead people in the city. Choose. So most people choose to live. So this is another example of people moving up in the Manchu world. Now, the Manchus are going to continue to recruit the Han Chinese to work alongside Manchus in all kinds of areas. In fact, the Manchus will look at the civil service system, which is a Confucian setup. And they're going to look at this, the civil service exams, the government bureaucracy, and they're going to go, yeah, this works. Let's keep doing this. And they're going to hire Han Chinese, that is ethnic Chinese, to run all this, to become bureaucrats, to become top government assistants to the Manchu. So they'll work side by side with Manchu, but understand that Han Chinese were always a step below the Manchu. But this is a change in the social order. In some ways, this is not all that different from what the Mongols did during the Yuan dynasty in a number of ways. They adopted a lot of practices. The Manchu saw a lot of things working as well. Civil service exams, government bureaucracy. They said, let's keep this going. Just be sure to wear your hair in a queue, or otherwise you could be dead. So you don't want to do that. So here's a map of the Qing, our Manchu Empire ruling area. So you can see the boundaries are modern day People's Republic of China, plus some areas of Russia like Vladivostok and some Eastern Siberian areas. You're going to see Mongolia fall under that. You'll also see an island off of Guangzhou, and that is Taiwan. So today that's the Republic of China. However, don't go to the People's Republic of China and go to them and say, oh yeah, I went to Taiwan, nice country. They get very offended. They consider it a breakaway province at this time, but that's Unit 8. So piece that away for Unit 8. Just remember that, like the Mongols under the Yuan dynasty, the Manchus adopted a tremendous amount from the Chinese that worked. So let's keep on moving. Bureaucratic elites. Here's the quick chart. So talk about bureaucratic elites changing Eurasia and upsetting existing social orders. We're going to see this in the Gunpowder empires, like the Ottoman Empire. I talked about the Janissaries. These are graduates of the Devshirme who become elites of the Ottoman military, and they even get into the bureaucracy of the government as well. So good thing, keep the Timur grants coming. In the Safavid Empire, you have the Kizilbash, or the coalition of mainly Shia Turks. So remember, Shia is Shiite. Okay, this is the smaller form of Islam. If you're Sunni, that's the majority. So you'll see the Safavid Empire, especially in Iran, parts of Iraq, and this is a coalition mainly Shia or Shiite. And who has covered these gunpowder empires? I did. So you can actually look up gunpowder empires under Dar al-Islam. We also, Eric, there was someone else who also did a fantastic job diving even deeper into gunpowder empires. So maybe you might be able to put that up into the text box for us, please. And the Kizilbash coalition, mainly Shia Turks, they owed their allegiance to the Shah. So they viewed him as divine, or having divine following. In other words, his rule was there by a higher. So Evan Lindell did a fantastic job on Islamic empires. Thank you on the first three. Let's go to the Mughal Empire. So remember, we're going to India and the northern areas, and the zamindars, landowners in Persian. They collected taxes on behalf of the Mughal Empire. They held lordship titles. This meant you had control of land, people, resources. So these people are going to upset the order there as well. Now we shift over to a Eurasian empire, the Russian Empire. I told you about the Boyars, highest rank of Slavic feudal society. They held the highest state offices of the Kievan Rus. Now, the Kievan Rus is what you're going to see as ethnic Russian until we start building the much bigger Russia. And then we're going to start seeing Russia predominate, or that identity as Russian. Now, the Ivans are going to suppress them because they're holding the land. And the Ivans who take over want the land. So remember, one Ivan at a time ruling. Then we go to the Manchu Empire. And if you saw the advertisement, for this, it's the Bannermen. So they were Manchus that organized Qing society in the 8 banners. They served as military order and social stratification. So they defined the different social strata that were there. So this is like the quick guide. The first 3 are gunpowder empires, then you have the Russian, and then you have East Asian Manchu. So let's keep going. European hierarchies, continuities, and changes. Now we're going to shift over to Europe. So European hierarchies began with royalty. Remember, the ruling class held the top spots. And nobility, however, would be right below them, and they would hold the land, but they'd only be a very small part of the population. So a very minute part of the population was controlling large amounts of land. A lot of this descended from feudal ages where they kept building land and they held on to it. So nobles perpetuated their power by using titles, like in England, dukes, earls. I'm sure you can throw in more titles there. For the French, they had other titles for them. You'd also see this in what today would become Germany, what would become Austrian-Hungarian Empire. However, the nobles are going to contend with radical religious sects. They're going to come up, and they're going to have to deal with the middle class that is growing. And this is going to start upsetting things for the nobles. Plus, royalty is going to start coming after them as well. So let's see why. Let's look at European hierarchies. And I remember somebody had a question in the chat area. What is CCOT? Well, here you go. It's continuity and changes over time. Continuity and change over time. So CCOT, or continuity and change over time, means that we're looking at how things stay the same over time, and we're looking at how things change over a period of time. So you're comparing perhaps 2 empires, or 2 states, or 2 societies, or 2 cultures, and you're seeing how things remain the same over time, and you're seeing how things stay the same over time. So for us, we're looking at how do they stay the same over time from 1450 to 1750, and we're looking at how they change over time from 1450 to 1750. So now we jump into nobility, and they gain in England and in the Netherlands. In England, for example, Parliament was home to the nobles. The House of the Lords, which is very ceremonial today, back then was very powerful. This is where the nobles held power. And this is the part of Parliament where they would do that, hold that power. And the House of Commons is going to have to build up over time in England. Now, the Netherlands, nobles supported local provincial governments. So those governments counted on nobles to back them up. Now, however, if you go to France, nobles are going to be on the losing side. You're going to see a growing middle class of merchants, people buying and selling things, skilled workers rising up in stature and power, the clergy and the Catholic Church, and common people. And all these are, and especially common people, but merchants, skilled workers, they're going to lead the uprisings. Plus, Louis XIV decided to keep powers from commoners and nobility. He was smart. He looked at this and he said, I don't want commoners taking over, and I don't want these nobles having power over me. So we can see continuity of structure for nobles in England and Netherlands because they remain in power because they're needed. But in France, there's change. This change is occurring because different classes are rising up, and the king is also, the royalty is going after them as well. So let's find out more. Now, here we go. Royalty's best weapon, gunpowder. So royalty realized, and France was no exception to this, that cannon and other technological advances, guns, and other types of explosive devices of the gunpowder era gave them power. So royals in France and in other areas, and if you notice in the background of this picture, you can see some distinctly French buildings. Royals used these weapons to destroy noble fortresses and take their land. So this is an example in CCOT of change over time. This is not all going to happen overnight. So remember, gunpowder empires didn't have a monopoly on this. Cannon were moving all over the world. So let's keep going. Now we're going to shift over to the New World, North and South America. We're going to step into the Casta system of North and South America. This is a whole new form of social hierarchy. So if you look at continuity and change over time, this is definitely significant change over time. So let's dive into it. Now, as Spaniards would move in the North, Central, and South America, the Portuguese would go into what is today Brazil. You would see Africans many times being brought over as enslaved individuals to North America, Central, Caribbean, South America, and Native Americans, who many of them were decimated by smallpox and other diseases. But those that survived, a whole new order arose based on your ancestry and your race. This is the Casta system. All right? The Casta system is an ethnic and racial background system that defined where you ranked socially based on your social status. And this was especially so in Spanish and Portuguese, North and South America. So for the Spanish, North, Central, South America, the Portuguese, South America, Brazil. So let's see some more about this and look at what the Casta system was. Now, the Casta system in Spanish Latin America was created because you had people that came over from Spain. They're looking for land. Remember, all the land's taken up in Spain. The Portuguese did the same thing as well. They're looking for land, and so they come over, and of course they're meeting people, you know, people fall in love, people decide to marry, people decide to, you know, have kids. And so now, for all kinds of reasons, and now you have different groups, so they got to be able to distinguish these different groups so they can keep a social order. So Spanish and Portuguese colonists wanted to make sure that they stayed on top of this new ever-evolving social order. So let's get into ancestry and race-defined social hierarchy. So peninsulares were people that were born in the Iberian Peninsula. If you were born in Spain or Portugal, that meant you were a peninsulare. You were the top of the social hierarchy in the colonial world. Now, criollos are European ancestry, but they're born in the Americas. In other words, your parents were peninsulares. They came from Spain or Portugal, but you were born in the New World, in North or South America. So you would be a criollo. You're like a notch below now. So you're starting to move down. Then you have mestizos. These are people of mixed European and Native American ancestry. So you could have a peninsulate who marries or gets together with a Native American. It could be a Criollo. And then you would have a mestizo. And that starts moving further down. Then you start having mulattoes. These are people of mixed European and Native African ancestry. This is more common than you would think. So you would see this in Spanish colonies and in North and South America and Brazil, which is South America, Portuguese, for mulattoes. And then Zambos. Zambos were people of mixed African and Native American ancestry. They would be at the bottom of this social hierarchy. So as it's listed out on here, it goes from top to bottom. So the next slide, we're going to show you from highest to lowest the social hierarchy called the Casta system. There it is. So you see peninsulares, people that were born in Spain or Portugal on top. Creoles or criollos in Spanish. They're born in the New World, but the parents are peninsulares, are Spanish or Portuguese from Europe. Then mestizos, where you have a peninsulare or criollo marrying a Native American, and their offspring are mestizo. Mulattoes move further down, where you have a European or criollo and African having children, and those children would be known as mulattoes. And then at the bottom would be Native Americans, Africans, and Zambos. Zambos would be a combination of Native American and African put together. Okay, this is the Casta system. Here's a picture. It's a little bit smaller, but this is a picture comparison of various castas. And you can look on the upper left corner and see the peninsulares, and it moves across to the right. Then it starts to the left and moves across until you get all the way down. You may note it. So let's take a look at this picture for a moment. What are some things you notice about the people as you move down the picture? So in the chat box, go ahead and put in what you notice from this picture. I'll check the poll while we're waiting for some people to chime in. I can see many people doing SAQ, so that is good to see. We've got some DBQ people. And by the way, don't be afraid to ask questions. Nothing in the question box yet, so you're welcome. It's the Ask a Question. It's right beside polls. Here we go. Okay. All right, so the lower you go down in the painting, the lower the quality of the people seem to be that are living there. So do you notice skin tone or skin color? If you do, you're picking up on the Casta system. You're also going to start seeing ethnicity. They're going to be less peninsulares or European looking, and they're going to start becoming more, they're going to take on more characteristics of Native American, African in this. So yes, skin tone becomes darker. So as you're moving down, it's a little harder to see on this. I wish the picture was a little bigger. So, but you got it. All right. Now, get ready for viewer input. This is for our big thing. So how did changing social orders in Europe, Africa, and Asia differ from the Casta system in North and South America? So how did the changing social orders we talked about in Europe, in Russia, in Manchu China, in the Ottoman Empire, how do those orders, how are they different from the Casta system in North and South America? So, chat box, start writing, start typing. I can't wait for your answers. Bring them on. So, as we're waiting for some people to come up with that, I'm going to leave that up for a moment. Let me check the question box, make sure everything is spot on. We're looking good. Don't be afraid to answer, by the way. So one of the things about the social orders that we saw in Europe was that you had landowning elites that were trying to hold on to power and hold on to land. And in some areas like England, Netherlands, they were more successful at this. In France, they were not. In other areas, you would see foreign invaders come in, like the Manchus, and they would come in and bring, or the Ottomans, and they would bring up other people and rise them up. So these are, and you can go back to the chart. And let me take you back to that chart real quick. There we go. There we go, bureaucratic elites. Here's the chart with all the, what I call the, the elites that are changing up the system. In other words, these are going to be big things that the rulers are going to have to face. So remember, the Janissaries in the Ottoman Empire, Safavid, the Kizilbash, the Mughal Empire, the Zamindars, Boyars in the Russian Empire, Manchu, we got the Bannermen. So let's move back to our question. Now, if you go to the Casta system in North and South America, this is going to be a whole new creation. And it's created because people are getting together and having kids that normally would have never done so. But in the New World, you're far away from Europe, you're far away from Africa, you're far away from other areas. So people are meeting and having kids, and all of a sudden, there are all these new racial areas. Like if you go to Brazil, for instance, there are about 25 to 30 different racial categories. So that's why you see the different Casta system. So changing social orders in Europe, many of them are people holding on, trying to hold on to power, or trying to disrupt power, but they've been there for a while. Now, in North and South America, you're going to see whole new creations of a social order, and you're going to see the people at the top trying to enforce that social order upon them. And this is going to continue to this day. If you look at Latin American studies, you will still see this matters tremendously. The Casta system is an incredible change that still defines what Brazil, Colombia, Peru, Chile, Mexico, Cuba, Haiti, Jamaica. I could keep Venezuela, could keep going on and on, but let's keep moving. All right, let's go into continuity and change over time and just take a look at what that is. And then we're going to give you an example, which, by the way, I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that there is going to be another SAQ that is coming out soon. And this SAQ, you're going to have an opportunity to submit it, and through Schoology, to have people grade it for you. In other words, it's not going to count as a grade like at school. It's going to be feedback. And then actually, Mr. Beckman, who is on the line with us right now, he is going to be doing a review where he goes over those and explains it a week later. So this is an incredible opportunity. I highly recommend that you take advantage of it. I'm sure Mr. Beckman right now is putting in a link and some information for us. So please take advantage of that. But let's keep going, because I want to make sure if you want to hop over to a 9 p.m. one, you can do it for Fiveable. So continuity and change over time is a means of comparing over a time period how things changed and how things continue to remain the same over time. And this is done by comparing one's empire or state's social, cultural, economic, political system, anything under inspector pieces, or whatever you might be using, or what we used to call spice, to that of another empire or state. So here's some tips whenever you're doing a CCOT, continuity and change over time. And there's the link. Thank you so much, Mr. Beckman. Definitely go ahead and click on that. So when a tip that you use, and you're going to often see this in LEQs, long essay questions, but CCOT, you can see it in SAQs as well. Use the inspect or the pieces framework or whatever your teacher may be using, the old version of spices. Such, for example, I use inspect. So when you're answering CCOT, use that framework in your mind. Second, stay in the same category for each part of the question you answer. In other words, if you're answering about social interactions and organizations for two empires, stay in social until that question is answered. Then when you get to B, if it says political, then change over, okay? Now, we have an example one. So I'm going to go ahead and click over to this. Now, for viewer input. Now, I understand that this is probably a little longer than some of you might have explained right away, but you don't have to necessarily put this into large SAQ. In other words, we're not going to take 12, 13 minutes to do this. You can get smaller and shorter, but think of this as like a practice run. You can take a snapshot of this, plus we're going to include the slides in there. So let's go into the viewer input. Short answer question. Don't be afraid to put things in the chat box. So let me read this quote. This comes from a recent book by Rutilio Martinez and Vishayer called Racial Caste Systems, Salient Marketing Implications. So sounds like, marketing business book. So here we start at the top. Nowadays, some 185 years after most of Latin American nations achieved independence, none of the Latin American governments consider race to be an issue. However, this view is not shared by all academics and regular citizens. They see the prevailing economic hierarchy and the easily uncovered attitudes that consider dark-skinned people to be inferior to light-skinned individuals as evidence of a distinct racial stratification in Latin American society. There's a word that people like in AP World History, stratification. So it means social classes, ranking people. So let me go back. Third paragraph. While this system is nowhere as rigid as the one existing several hundred years ago, the fact that it still dominates thinking in Latin American societies must be proof that it has powerful economic, social, and political effects. So just from this quote and from what we've learned from these slides, the first part of the SAQ, and again, you don't have to write it as long. Look for ideas right now. Or if you want to, you can do a screenshot of this and then sit down and do a timed SAQ where you do your 12 and a half minutes. So A, explain one way in which the Casta system changed the elite class in Latin American colonies and today in Latin American countries. So we're looking at one way the Casta system changed the elite class in Latin American colonies and today in Latin American countries. As you answer these, just put the A and put a little bit of what you're going to answer that by. Then B, explain one way in which policies of kings and leaders withstood challenges in the 1450 to 1750 CE period. And then C, explain one way in which social structures of the period 1450 to 1750 CE in the Americas compares to social structures in the Ottoman Empire. So again, when you go to answer these, go ahead and just put in the chat box. You can put in shorter answers that have A, put down some thoughts, put down B, put down some thoughts, put down C, put down some thoughts on that. You can also screenshot this and we're going to be including the link for you. So let me give you a minute or so to go ahead and answer that. I'm going to check the question boxes, make sure. I don't see any questions right now. Our poll, oh, it's increasing. We got some more DBQ people. And SAQ. So with that said, just some hints to move you along with this, and then we're going to go ahead and wrap up for this evening, is that for A, the Casta system changed the elite class in Latin American colonies because before Europeans came over, there was an elite class. They were Native Americans. And when Europeans and Africans came over, all of a sudden there is this mixing of different ethnicities, racial areas, and they create, and European Spaniards and Portuguese settlers create the Casta system so that they can keep people from the mainland, Iberia, Spain and Portugal at top, their descendants who were born of them in the colonies, and then Native Americans, African, and then downward as you move to keep them in place. So this is a system where the elite class is being changed away from Native Americans with the Inca, Aztec, and other Native American civilizations, and it's imposing a new order upon them that has a European favoritism to it. Then B, let's explain one way in which policies of kings and leaders withstood challenges in the 1450 to 1750 CE period. You can see in France that Louis XIV is experiencing contentious situations between his nobles who want to hold on to land and also other middle class, skilled classes. So one of the ways in which the policies of kings and leaders withstood those challenges is that they employed gunpowder technology, and they would seize noble lands and hold that for themselves. You could also say that in England and Netherlands, they made them part of the representative system and the provincial government systems so that they brought them in and gave them a stakeholder position so that they wouldn't break away. Those are just some possible answers. There are more. C, explain one way in which the social structures of the period 1450 to 1750 CE in the Americas compares to social structures in the Ottoman Empire. So we're going to see that in the Americas, under Spanish, Portuguese, and also under the Ottoman Empire, you're going to see individuals that were brought in some cases, are going to rise in power. For instance, if we go to Haiti, we can do Toussaint Louverture, who leads the Haitian Revolution. He's far down on the social order, but he ends up moving up as a leader. We also see Ottoman Empire. We're going to see people like Roxolana, who is abducted, sold off to Suleiman the Magnificent's harem, and then she gets married to him, and on top of it, leads his top public works project. She's a top leader and strategist. So we're seeing people who are defying social structures. You're also going to see this in the Latin American independence movements. You'll find in Colombia, Venezuela, Chile, in Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia. So understand, which was Gran Colombia, understand Portugal's not going to have a revolution. You're also going to see this in Mexico as well. You're going to see people that will defy these social orders and be able to pull away with it. However, most of the leaders, as you moved higher up, as you moved in these revolutions, they tended to be criollos, at best, very light-skinned mestizos at lowest. So Haiti is your big difference maker there. So those are some possible answers. Those are not all the answers, but this is just to get you going. So I want to thank you for joining me this evening. Again, think Fiveable. You can see this on Twitter, Instagram. You can watch this on YouTube. We're hitting about 9:03, so there are some other streams that are going on. You're very welcome. I hope this was very helpful for you. Before we, in about 5 to 10 minutes after we're done with this, I am going to go ahead in the next couple minutes and put in the link to the Google slides so that you can download them and take them with you. So let's check real quick, make sure there aren't any questions. Nope, I'm not seeing any questions. You're very welcome. I'm glad you could attend this evening. Thank you for joining me for Fiveable this evening. And I wish you great AP World work, continued great studying, and continued success in all your AP courses. So have a great evening, everybody. Good night.